at Union Theological Seminary, where meeting Sergey once upon a time and being in Dr. McGuckin's classes. And I went in actually to study religious violence. That was my original intention. My original intention was I wanted to know why people killed in the name of God, because I thought this was just batshit crazy. Everything I was saying, okay, seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay. And so I didn't like that people were using the name of God to justify violence. And so I went and spent 3 years. I went and spent 3 years studying the religious writings of ISIS and Al Qaeda, because ISIS and Al Qaeda actually have a specialized theological journal. It's actually very, very strange. And then I got enhanced and in love with orthodoxy almost by accident. And so by just walking in on my first day, that's me futzing up the screen share on purpose, actually. And then it ended up getting immersed in switching to, well, how do we fight violence in a different way? So what do I do the rest of my time? So one of the things we also do, I was very happy to be and very privileged and honored to be nominated for an Academy Award this year, where I tried to have my little subtle protest in protecting Ukraine at the Academy Awards. I put the link to the film in the website. The film is related to this meeting. It's related to a man who was in the Marines for 25 years. And he decided when he got out of the Marines that he wanted to kill all Muslims. And he staked out a Muslim center in Muncie, Indiana, planning to shoot them and blow them up, and would go into the mosque to figure out how to do that. And then they're nice to him and they treat him with kindness and they treat him with love and they invite him for dinner and they're very welcoming. And while he's planning to kill them all, he converts to Islam. A very strange thing. Now, the other thing about being in Ukraine, I find Ukrainian personal protective equipment. I went a few weeks ago to see the massacre. This is in Bucha, where they killed hundreds of people indiscriminately. Where the churches, I was in the church basement. Always have your fine, always get the right tank to be outside your hotel. That's Banksy's um, mural that he did in Bucha. Putin is a judo player, some of you may know. And so that's little Ukraine throwing Putin. I hope you're able to hear this. I was with a bunch of medical students in Ukraine. I said, what do you want me to tell people? What do you want to say to people back in America when I present in academic places and at medical schools? What do you want to say to people? Say whatever you want.
We are medical students. Don't let them kill us. We are medical students. Don't let them kill us.
Now, what we have here is that those young people, because they're women, would be able to speak, would be able to leave the country, because women are allowed to, children are able to leave the country. All men between the ages of 18 and 60 cannot leave the country because of a draft. And they chose to stay behind. So that was in Ukraine. I went about 4 or 5 weeks after the start of the invasion, and they said, we thought we were going to go to medical school and leave and move to the West, but I want to stay in Ukraine and make it the most famous and best country in the world, and put their life on the line to be able to make things right. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm actually presenting today. Today's presentation is actually on the Arthurian tradition. And so this is derivatives of medieval French literature from the time of about the 11th and 12th century. And so what this is that it starts out with a bit of pseudo history, generally of Monmouth, making up ideas about kings that weren't really there. And it becomes increasingly mystical over about a period of about 40 years. So what we have is the very, very first things about 1170 with Chrétien de Troyes, working for Philip of Flanders. And then ultimately, by the time it ends up in the beginning of the 12th century, mid 12th century, when the Cistercians start to take it over, it becomes incredibly spiritual. Now, I've always wondered, is that too cynical of me to say that it's church propaganda? Mallory, the Mort d'Arthur, is actually really, really late. It's 300 years later, right? And so it starts out with Chrétien de Troyes, but Chrétien de Troyes never finished Percival or the Knight of the Grail, the story of the Grail. There's little continuers in 4 or 5 places. The Mabinogion is written in Welsh. Mabinogion, the thing is that's missing, they missed at Percival in Welsh is Peredur, but it's missing in the Grail story. Robert de Boron, don't know much about him, but the issue is he continues it and he brings in the lance, the dripping lance that is the lance of Longinus that pierced Christ's side while he's in the crucifixion, first appearance there. And Parzival, so whether you call it Percival, Parzival, Peredur, or Pelevos, the thing that's different about Parzival is that Eschenbach himself actually knew knighthood. And what's so interesting about this Grail story here, because there's 2 parts of the issues with chivalry. One is a general chivalric tradition, and then the other is the more spiritual end of it, the search for the Grail. So you could have chivalry without the search for the Grail, but they end up being bound together. Okay, end up being bound together, and so therefore it's different levels. And the different levels of this is that Parzival, Eschenbach says that the whole story was given to him by, ready? There's a guy named Quiot. And Quiot is hunting around a corner of a library in Toledo, Spain. And he finds a book that's called Written in Heathenish, which is to say in Arabic, because this book and this forgotten story tells the story of a guy named Flagitanus. Now, Flagitanus is a Muslim astronomer descended from Solomon. And the Grail at that time is a stone. It's a stone. It's not a cup. It's not the Grail that we use that says it's a cup that Christ used at the Last Supper. It's a stone that everyone will get the food and drink that he loves best from the Grail. And Flagitanus says that he looked at the stars, and the stars told him the story that there's a Grail, and it's brought to earth. And it's brought to earth by the neutral angels, the angels that were neutral in the war in heaven between Lucifer and God. Now, there's other stories that are more of the Cistercians, Quest del Saint Graal, where time, coincidentally, wow, around the year 1210, 1215. Gee, what's going on in church history around the year 1215? Because the Grail story, where it becomes now this stone that's brought from heaven by neutral angels, now becomes the chalice that Christ uses at the Last Supper, and which Joseph of Arimathea catches the blood that spills from Christ's side and hands and takes it to England, to Tintagel. And then what's happening around that time? The Fourth Lateran Council. And the Fourth Lateran Council is now saying that it is a literal body and blood of Christ. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that these 2 things are happening about the same time. But what happens is, to get a sense of how central this literature was to medieval educational life and to the power structure, we have to remember that Chrétien, the first writer of the Grail story in 1170, 1185, is not just some guy that's writing in his mother's basement trying to get published. He's working for the man, Philip I of Flanders, who is the tutor and regent of the King of France, Philip Augustus, who becomes the contemporary of Henry II when he's older. He marries the niece of Eleanor of Aquitaine, Philip, and that's part of the reason that this literature is so central, because the entire nobility across Europe was sponsoring stories of chivalry. And my hypothesis is that it was a purposeful effort to be able in a society, a European society that did not have any strong central government police force or ability to control what would basically be marauding, unstoppable M1 Abrams tanks, where the knights couldn't see each other. They couldn't recognize each other in the armor, the same way you wouldn't recognize someone who was inside a tank. And my hypothesis is that this is the effort to be able to get people to be controlled in their power that could otherwise and was otherwise used to basically take what they want. Might makes right. Venezuela just said that they want to take half of Guyana 2 weeks ago, right? I'm just going to grab it. 20% of Georgia is currently held by the Russians, right? Okay? Hundreds of thousands of people bombed out of obliteration in Syria. And so they wanted to make it that you can say, let's tell the story of Percival, Pierce Laval, through the middle, through the valley. And you say, Percival, according to all of the stories, is largely raised in the woods. You can take the story in the middle, like Gretchen, or you can say in Parzival, Parzival has it that his father was a knight errant who actually went off to fight to protect the king of Baghdad, and then went to protect a queen. And Percival Eschenbach is actually writing about real history. He puts current events there for his century. He's writing about early 13th century events, of which there was a kingdom that was the siege of Damascus, where a queen was being assaulted by both a Muslim and a Christian army. He helps them win. He marries the lady. But he's like, I got to keep fighting. She's like, no, don't fight anymore. Don't fight. Stay at home with me and let's have a kid. And he runs out of the house in the middle of the night, runs back to fighting, and marries the Queen of Wales. But the issue is he dies in battle. And his mother says, like you would do at Buddha, I don't want Siddhartha Gautama to see evil or negativity. His mother goes, I've had enough of being around people who think fight, 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 fight. Let's move me and my baby into the woods. So Percival is brought up in the woods by his mother, even though he's the King of Wales, Percival le Gallois. Percival, the King of Wales. And she hides his identity. She hides his identity and makes him grow up thinking he's just a dude who hunts in the forest. Now, the boy is a bit of a fool. He doesn't know what anything is. So one day, 3 knights come riding through the woods. And he goes, are you gods? They're so shiny. They have feathers. They're so beautiful. And he goes, we're not gods, we're knights. And then 3 knights say to each other, this kid, if it wasn't for the fact that he is so handsome and beautifully made, you would think this kid is a real, what's wrong with this kid? Hey, boy, get some sense into your head. But he goes to his mother and he says, Mom, I got to leave. I got to go be like one of those guys. And he bolts off to Arthur's court. Now, what ends up happening is that Percival, because Galahad doesn't exist for a while, he gets knighted. And what ends up happening is that his mother gives him some advice before he leaves. First, he goes, always woo women. Number 2, if you see anybody with gray hair, ask them for advice and learn something. And finally, go to church and to pray. So Percival obeys all of this, and he goes on his adventures and beats knights in various adventures. But what does he do? What's the value that he holds? He doesn't kill them. The whole of the Percival story has a couple of pieces. One, don't attack people that are not attacking you or hurting weak and innocent people. Number two, defend the weak, women, the innocent, defend the church. Now, that theme of defend the church is not so much in the earlier stories, but it is later when the Cistercians grab hold of it. When Galahad becomes basically a Christ figure, pure, sinless. Late 12th century, Gawain, sex, women, lots of ladies, all okay. 50 years later, a good knight is also a chaste knight. And that's why in the quest of the Holy Grail, when Nation the Hermit announces on the Feast of Pentecost that you're all to go in search of the Grail, and Gawain jumps up and he says, I will ride out for a year and a day or more, and I will not sleep 2 nights in the same place until I have found the Grail. And then the hermit goes, by the way, boys, no girls on the trip, man. No wives, no sweethearts, no lovers. Okay? Oh, and by the way, Lancelot, you're not going to get to touch the Holy Grail because you got your thing going on with Guinevere. Interestingly enough, Lancelot says, I will do any penance to the hermit, to the priest. I am heartfully sorry for my sins. I've begged your forgiveness. I will wear a hair shirt. I will go to mass every day. Ultimately, by the way, after Arthur is killed or off to Avalon, depending on your point of view, what does Lancelot do at the end of his life? Becomes a monk, dies a monk, and Guinevere dies a nun. Okay, but at the time he's told the most sacred quest in all of Christendom, you will go in, but you will not be allowed to touch the Grail. Only Galahad, Percival, and Bors, B-O-R-S, are allowed to touch the Grail. Lancelot is allowed to see it. Why couldn't I touch it? The hermit priest says, because your sin is before you, because of your great love for the queen. It is true. It is true. Well, I have spent my whole life fighting to be beloved and for worldly honor, not only fighting for God. And I would fight for the queen's sake, whether it was right or it was wrong. You must make penance then, Lancelot. I will make penance. I'll do anything. I'll wear this hair shirt. I will sleep outside. You must give up your sinful love of the queen. If your sin hadn't been before you, you would have achieved much more. No, I can't do that. I cannot give up my love for the queen. But Guinevere embodies all that is gracious and courteous and wonderful. And if I have anything worthy in me, in my soul, it is because of my love for the queen. So I won't give that up. And I've never been unfaithful to her. And that is a pretty big thing for a 12th and 13th century monk to write, because Chrétien was a cleric. That's a big thing to say. I will not give up my love for the queen. So we're back to Percival. And Percival, instead of killing the people he beats, he is told, show mercy when he meets Gurnemanz, the older knight, kind of looks like David, okay? The older warrior who's now, okay, retired, the retired warrior. He meets a retired warrior and says, this is how you should fight. If somebody yields to you, do not kill them. If they're weaker than you, do not hit them. If a man is unhorsed and you're on your horse, You must get off your horse because it would be against chivalry for you to attack that man on the ground who's in a weaker state than you. If he submits and begs for mercy, you must relent. What Percival adds himself, though, is he says, I want you to go to Camelot and submit yourself to King Arthur and to the Queen as my prisoner. And you say, the Red Knight sent you. The knights show up, they're beaten, they present themselves to Arthur. Arthur goes, welcome aboard, son, you're not prisoner anymore, join the round table. And he's a recruiter for the round table. But what are these stories saying? You have an air force. They don't have an air force. You can't do 22,000 airstrikes against people who are on the ground crunching buildings. Okay? Oh, hey, you have one of the largest armies, second largest army in the world. That country is 4 times smaller with 90% less tanks and airplanes. You can't go crunching and just grabbing things. You can't do that. Percival does not kill those he beats, does not strike those who are weaker. There's actually one story where the king says to Gawain, Gawain was a lusty dude and got himself into trouble. So he's actually, that's the story of the Gawain and the Green Knight, right? You have a year and a day. Gawain, for your crime, this is your sentence. You must, for a year and a day, go on a search to find what is it a woman truly wants from a man. And then the king assigns him a task. He says, if any lady asks you to do anything, you must agree to it, whether you like it or not. And in one of the stories, the lady of the castle says, you know that tournament that you're going to be in tomorrow? All the famous people are there. You're going to go fight. You're going to win. I want you to lose. I want you to run away, and I want you to be a coward to prove your love for me. Yes, my lady. Yes, my lady. Will you subject your ego, is what she's saying. So the other thing that is in the stories of chivalry, mercy, mercy, not killing, protecting the weak. Later, go to church and pray. Now, Percival finally manages to find his way to the castle of the rich fisher king. I will make you fishers of men. And he's fishing as his only entertainment because he's wounded through the thighs, as they say. Some people think that means castrated. But the fisher king, and fortis, without strength, without fortitude. Percival, in most of the stories, is in the castle, but he's told one other piece of advice by Gornemond, the retired knight, the older knight. He goes, here's how to fight. Check, I got that. I'm a badass, military prowess. Because without power, you can't do anything. Mercy. Don't pick on people. Protect. By the way, can you think of what it's like that you get beaten in a battle and somebody just trusts you, that you're so adhere to chivalry that you say, I'm going to actually go to jail and go to Arthur's court, and you can trust that that guy's actually going to show up? And so that is part of why this topic is much on my mind. The topic is much on my mind because when we open up our television and the internet to see the unrestrained use of power without the idea that it is completely disgusting, unacceptable, and you betray your honor and your God if you hurt and kill people, especially those who are weaker than you, and you're not using all your powers only to protect. Percival makes it to the Grail Castle, but he's told a nobleman and a knight should not be too chatty. You mean like you, Conrad? Exactly. Okay. And don't ask too many questions. Don't speak unless you're spoken to, and don't ask questions because it's impertinent. The window's shut, but it's bright as the sun. And the lance of Longinus comes, dripping blood. And he wants to say, what is that? But he doesn't. Then the Grail comes out. In one story held by maidens, later on in Cistercian tales, and in Mallory, it's transported without anybody touching it. What's that? Everybody eats. And he sees the wounded king. And the wounded king, the Fisher King, says, sit next to me, son. And he sees that he's terribly hurt, and he wants to go, how are you? How are you hurt? Can I help you? Whom does the Grail serve? Who is served with the Grail? But don't ask questions. So he goes to sleep that night. The castle disappears, and he's kicked out into the woods. And somebody on the castle wall yells, basically, Percival, you idiot, you blew it. If you had asked the question out of your compassion, the wounded king would have been healed, and the entire wasteland with it. And all sickness and all enchantment of the kingdom of Logris would have disappeared. But you failed to ask the question. You failed the question test. Now, in some of the stories, Percival's actually told outright. Merlin actually gets him and actually says outright, by the way, ask these questions, would you? But in most of them, that's not the point. In most of them, that's why T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland, he says, my culture in early 20th century England is a wasteland because everybody's a fake. Everybody's a phony. Dare I come and go? Dare I eat a peach? Dare I rock the universe? For I have measured out my life in coffee spoons. I have measured out my life in coffee spoons because everybody in this society is living with a fake social appropriateness instead of really what their impulse of compassion is. Whom does the Grail serve? So here's how I read this and my summation of this tradition of chivalry. Now, we don't have, I can't subpoena text messages from the Pope or from all of the monarchs of Western Europe. So it's hard to be able to say, we have these 5 letters directing, hey, would you write these tales? Because we want, in a society that has no central government, no police force, no international criminal court, not that it's that effective, but at least it's an idea. So we need to capture their hearts and minds with a spiritual idea, the great spiritual idea of chivalry to restrain power from hurting the weak, from grabbing a piece of somebody else's country, from might makes right, to saying that the point of power is to protect those with less power. That is my hypothesis, which I hope someday to prove. Take it from the man whose 4 children are named Galahad, Lancelot, Percival, and Caspian. Thanks for listening. What do you think, Brian?
Oh, I'm responding to each one. All right, I was waiting. Well, what do I think? I think
well, I want you to do it now. Nick will be brilliant, and then I'll be completely eclipsed.
It could happen. Who knows? Well, what do I think? I think at the beginning, you're telling some of these stories, and what is an enemy but someone whose story we haven't yet heard? Enemies have to be 2-dimensional villains, because once we begin to actually hear their story and discover, my goodness, they're like me, then we can no longer be brutal. We can no longer act inhumane. And war's been with us a long time. There's no doubt about that. I mean, it's Homo belotus is what we could call our species instead of Homo sapien. We're not the wise ones, we're the warring ones. But we're reaching a crisis point in that our technology of war has far outstripped any kind of restraint, any kind of capacity to act in a way that would not end up just ruining all of civilization. And so we're racing toward that, and something has to happen at some point. I'm not even sure how I ended up here. By the way, I'm delighted to be here. I've enjoyed every moment. I've been here the whole day. I suspect it has something to do with some of my writing. Somebody must have said, well, this guy writes on this topic, books like A Farewell to Mars and Postcards from Babylon and things like that. And people often think, well, BZ must be a pacifist. And I'm always very careful to say, I'm not a pacifist. Pacifism is an ethical position regarding violence that one can adopt apart from Christ. That doesn't describe me. What I am, I'm a Christian, or at least I'm trying to be. And so I'm obligated to allow Christ to inform me on the subject of violence. So that's where I'm at. I can admire ethical pacifism. I kind of do. It's just not where I'm coming from. And this has something to do with your chivalry here. What I try to make a distinction between is police function within a healthy society, and I understand not all societies are healthy, and just in the indiscriminate killing in waging war. And there really is a difference. And I'm not saying that there should not be the implementation of any kind of force within society. We have to have that. I mean, we just can't. Now, what the relation of the church to that kind of force is an open question. The church, in fact, is not the world. One of my favorite theologians, Stanley Hauerwas, he says, the primary task of the church is to make the world, meaning that the church needs to be something radically other. And I still think and I addressed, at least in brief in my talk, that we're still struggling with this conflation of the church and the state that goes way back. And the problem is it's very difficult then for the church to make the world because the church essentially then becomes the world. Nevertheless, as you're appealing to chivalry to restore some kind of honor in the implementation of force, well, I'm all for it, but where does that come from? I think that comes from our Christian foundation, our Christian
Well, the question
roots.
is that when I brought this up and discussed it with some other historians, the other part is though is that is it also dependent upon the fear of God?
Mm-hmm.
Because the central piece of a lot of these things is one, it's creating in this 12th and 13th century societal value, which was happening, by the way, in Japan at the same time with Bushido.
Yeah.
But the thing is,
This is also the time of St. Francis.
correct. That's right. St. Francis moving, going across the lines in the Fifth Crusade, trying to convert the Sultan.
Yeah,
we know that he met him, but we don't know what he said. But
there's a wonderful book called The Saint and the Sultan. I forgot who wrote it, but it's a really good book.
Yeah. So we have to go on in time. There's time at the end for anybody who wants to say anything else, but I want to make sure that we allow Nicholas to germinate.
Can I say just?
Yeah.
You would like to say, yes, Dr. Conrad, thank you very much for your presentation. It's so rich. Like I feel like I still have to process a lot. But what resonates with me, like when you put the Ukrainian medical student who asked, "Don't kill us," and then in your presentation, this monk doesn't refuse the love, to have a love. And this is, I don't know, like it's some kind of give me feeling that we still humans and we still appreciate and we still can be ground and find the peace. Thank you very much.
Пожалуйста, very much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Dr. Nicholas Soy. I am the director of the Orthodox Peace Fellowship. I am also a social scientist, so I'll be talking a little bit about social science, research on conflict, and theology today. My talk is titled Eirenology, a Theology of Peace. So last time I looked at conflict statistics from 2022, if you look at the publicly reported numbers from more than 20 countries and count the number of people who have died in fighting, in combat, in wars last year, what you find is that 80% of battle deaths last year occurred in two countries, Ukraine and Ethiopia. 80%, 8 and 10. This is notable to me because Ethiopia is the most Christian nation in the world. And I think 90% are Orthodox Christians. And Ukraine is, of course, I think 70% Orthodox last time I checked. And the country who has invaded Ukraine is Russia, which is also around 70% nominally Orthodox. Of course, actual attendance rates can vary. So what we have is that the majority of people who were killed in battle last year were killed in a predominantly Orthodox country. So we can infer that most of the people who did the killing were Orthodox, and most of the people who were killed were Orthodox. When you look at the intersection of religion and conflict last year, Orthodox Christianity is the #1 perpetrator and victim of combat violence. This should give pause to those who claim to be Orthodox. Why is this variety of Christianity so involved in warfare? And especially to those who claim to be theologians, this presents a real analytical challenge. I would say that the #1 challenge facing the Orthodox Church right now is this very uncomfortable fact that it is Orthodox Christians at the front lines of wars today. Now, if you look at 2023 numbers, the situation, I wouldn't say it's better. There are certainly fewer Orthodox Christians as a percentage of of the global conflict deaths, but that's because since the invasion of Ukraine, we've seen an explosion in local conflicts in places like Darfur, in Gaza, Nagorno-Karabakh, a kind of breakdown of the international order in the past year that was led by this Orthodox killing. One further uncomfortable truth is that nothing that a theologian says here today can solve this situation in the short term. There's nothing we can say at this meeting which will lead to an end to the killing. However, the reason that I'm talking is because I think in the long term, there is some hope. There is a chance that the theology that the Orthodox Church puts out could have an impact, could prevent another year like 2022 from ever happening again. So let me explain the social science behind this. Social scientists have been studying conflict and peace for decades and have produced some stunningly robust findings. One finding from this peace science is that there are some societies which form what are called peace systems. A peace system is a group of societies which do not make war with one another. Since World War II, Europe has formed one of these societies, and we see smaller tribal groups, lots of, the US and Canada, for example, not since 1812. So one question that social scientists can look at is, instead of the classic question, what causes war, is we can ask, what causes peace? What are the conditions necessary for creating a sustainable peace system? How do we turn Israel and Palestine into a peace system? How do we turn Russia and Ukraine into a peace system? How do we manage peace systems to prevent war in the first place? So research on this question has considered a number of different variables. There's a lot of theories about what causes peace: social, economic, historical, political variables. Is it security agreements, security forces? Is it ecological underpinnings? Is it economic interdependence? Is it cultural values, shared identity, shared language? Are particular mechanisms for conflict management that matter? Types of institutions? There's a couple of dominant theories. One is called the McDonald's theory of peace, which was this observation that no country with a McDonald's had ever invaded another country with a McDonald's since McDonald's came about. The underlying theory here is that the economic integration you have when you have these kind of multinational corporations is going to be so powerful that it's just going to be not make sense economically to invade a country that you have these trade ties with. Unfortunately, the McDonald's theory was disproven last year when Russia, which had a McDonald's, invaded Ukraine. When you look at all of these theories, theories of treaties, theories of the UN agreements, there are three things that stand out as kind of robust findings correlated with peace systems. And they're not the economic or military goals that you might think of. It's not security pacts or trade. Instead, it's cultural values. Peace systems, the number 1, 2, and 3 correlates of being a peace system is culture, culture, culture. In particular, non-warring norms. Is it normal in your society to be bellicose, to fight back, to get in someone's face, or to be peaceful and forgiving? Non-warring rituals. When you have a big festival, is it a military parade, or is it a day of peace? And non-warring values. What do we value? Who are our heroes? Are they people like Gandhi, or are they people like Alexander the Great? So this culture of peace are the top 3 correlates: norms, rituals, and values. And this is good news for theologians, because what is theology about? Well, in part, it's about the norms we practice as a society, the things that we value, and especially for a church like Orthodox Christianity, the rituals that we perform together. And so if it is the case that these cultural values matter so much to actually preventing war, then there is a good hope that theology, which is one of the primary reproducers of cultural values, could actually make an impact. Things like rituals, values, things that we hold dear, are mediated through religion, public holidays, and so on. And I think part of the reason that we see, for example, the invasion of Ukraine, is an infection of Orthodox theology with military symbols, things like the main church of the Russian armed forces with a dome built to mimic a missile silo. So this is not to say that pacifism, the idea that one should never go to war, is the correct ethical theory. But it is to say that if your neighbors are pacifists, if those are the values they hold, then you will probably form a peace system with them if you yourself share those values. So, my proposal is that in order to hasten the achievement of peace values in our world, the Orthodox Church has a critical role to play. Because the Orthodox Church is on the front line of so many conflicts today, over the decades, if a strong theology of peace is developed and practiced ritually, publicly, then decades from now, we might see Russia, Ukraine, Ethiopia as among the most peaceful societies, a strong peace system. And theology does have a role to play in this. So what I want to sketch for the remainder of my time is what might a distinctively orthodox theology of peace look like. So peace is often considered an issue of social thought, not a theological issue. The Orthodox Church has devoted a lot of attention to classic theological issues like Trinity, the Incarnation, depiction of Christ in icons. While social issues like war, peace, poverty, politics are under-theorized among Orthodox theologians. And there's a straightforward reason for this. Classically, for like patristic theology, for example, there is no such thing as social theology. For the Greek fathers, theology, theologos, is words about God. When you speak theologically, you are talking about the Incarnation, the Trinity, and perhaps the depiction of Christ in icons, insofar as that's an incarnational question. So to talk about a theology of peace for an Orthodox Christian might raise a few eyebrows. So this is our first obstacle here. There's a view that everything that isn't proper theology in the Orthodox Church is just economia. I think that this is a mistake, at least in the case of peace. In my opinion, peace is a properly theological subject in the Orthodox sense. What I mean by that is when Orthodox Christians speak about peace, they are speaking about God properly, words of God here. And that our attitudes towards violent and conflict management should be directly informed by this understanding of the nature of the Godhead. After all, peace, Irene, is one of the divine names given in the Dionysian corpus. If you read the patristic fathers, they say God is peace. They identify God with peace, where peace represents the very essence of the divine nature. While St. John wrote that God is love, both St. Gregory of Sinai and St. Nilus of Sora wrote that, quote, God is peace. St. Leo the Great wrote, the birthday of Christ is the birthday of peace, while St. Paul, of course, said Christ is our peace. When he commented on this, St. Augustine said, we also say, love you peace, love you Christ. For if you love peace, you love Christ. Why? Because he is our peace, who has made both one. Likewise, St. Basil says, he who seeks peace seeks Christ, for Christ is the peace. Throughout the tradition, Christ is called the Prince of Peace, the God of peace, the author of peace. We also see this in the identification with the first great church of Constantinople. Before Hagia Sophia was built, we had Hagia Irene was the primary church of the East, which would have celebrated its patronage feast day on December 25th, the birthday of Christ, because Hagia Irene is just another name for Christ. Orthodox theologians, of course, are familiar with Sergei Bulgakov, who developed his sophiology, his study of wisdom in the divine Godhead, on the basis of divine simplicity. So Bulgakov used this argument from Augustine, that in divine simplicity, there is no distinction within the essence of God. God is essentially wise, benevolent, powerful, peaceful, among other things. But these words that we use to describe the divine essence, power, benevolence, wisdom, are not separate things, but are identical because there are no parts to God. And so to say that God is powerful is the same to say that God is benevolent, the same to say that God is wise, the same to say that God is peaceful. So Bulgakov said, well, why don't we just call this Sophia, wisdom, which is his kind of Augustinian argument. Since it's all the same thing, let's understand the essence and use wisdom as the lens through it. My suggestion is the exact same argument, but not sophiology, but Eirenology. Not Sophia as the name for the divine essence, but peace. Because, again, peace is part of the essence, so it is the entirety of the essence. Peace is identical with God. And so we should not distinguish peace from the rest of the nature of God or Christ's salvific worth on earth. Peace is integral to everything that we do as Christians, and when properly understood, this is not a new suggestion. This is why I quoted so many different saints. It's what they've been saying the whole time. That God is peace is a patristic idea. And so peace is at the very center of theology when properly understood. What excites me about this lens on the divine essence is it allows us to give a positive definition of peace. And that is where we must start our reflections. When peace science first emerged in the 1960s, one of its foundational insights was to distinguish negative peace, which is the absence of conflict, from positive peace, the presence of cooperation. Strangers who do not interact with each other may share a negative peace, but they don't share anything positive. Since this foundational insight, peace science has elaborated on a robust vision of a peaceful world that involves social, military, and economic cooperation, and has posited that peace is founded on the deep nonviolence inherent in cooperative social interactions. I think Orthodox Christians can make a similar move, that peace is not just this positive cooperation, but is the very presence of God among people and in society. Peace work, then, being a peace worker, involves the whole liturgical life of the church. Thus, we see why we might want peace rituals. And establishing peace is nothing less than establishing the communion that unites all people with God and therefore with one another. To be a peacemaker is to be a child of God, as Christ himself said in the Beatitudes, and it is no wonder why, for God is peace, and the coming of Christ on earth is the coming of peace, as the angels will sing in 10 days, if you're on the new calendar. We, as his disciples, then, are disciples of peace, and there is scarcely anything that so blasphemes the essence of the Godhead and interrupts the salvific work of Christ than to kill one another. Now, you might worry, can we really draw such a line from theological statements about the essence of God to the practical issues like establishing a culture of nonviolence among Orthodox Christians? Well, here's the good news. I'm not the first person to make the suggestion in the Orthodox Church. In fact, the argument I've given in this talk simply comes from St. Gregory the theologian, the preeminent Orthodox theologian. Here is a quotation from his second oration on peace. Quote, "Beloved peace, my preoccupation and my glory, we hear that it both belongs to God and characterizes God, represents in fact the very essence of God, as the scriptural expressions, the peace of God and the God of peace, and he is our peace attest, though this is not how we honor him. Beloved peace, the blessing celebrated by all, preserved by few, how have you abandoned us? Horrible is what we see in our own day, regions depopulated, casualties in the thousands, an earth groaning under the weight of blood and corpses. There is nothing worse than peace put to flight." And if someone asked us, what is it that you worship and respect? We should say love. For it is in the Holy Spirit's own word that our God is love. And this is in fact the name that God cherishes above all others. What is the sum of the law of the prophets? This is the only answer that he will accept. Why then do we, the disciples of love, hate one another so? Why do we, disciples of peace, engage in wars which do not admit of treaty or truce? End quote. For St. Gregory the theologian for the Orthodox Church, God's essence is both understood as peace and love, and of course by divine simplicity, there's the same thing. And since peace and love are the very being of God, the greatest betrayal of the Christian faith is to act in a way that is violent or unloving. For St. Gregory, the line between these is direct. Peace is the presence of God, communion, and the Holy Spirit that comes through the spiritual, sacramental, and social practices of the Christian faith. As such, it is essential that Christians seek peace. More profoundly, If God is peace and God is love, then consider the distinctive Orthodox teaching of theosis, or divinization, as it's called in the West, whereby we take on by grace the attributes which Christ possesses by nature, attributes reflecting the essence of God. Theosis, divinization, implies that the attributes of love and peace must grow within individuals and community as the salvific work of God unfolds. To be saved in orthodoxy is to take on these attributes reflecting the divine essence. And if the divine essence is peace, then to be saved, you need to become peaceful. You need to become loving. In light of this, teachings in Christianity like forgiveness, love of enemies, these are not secondary social teachings of economia, but these are central to the very theology of how the church understands salvation. Loving one's enemies, seeking forgiveness instead of retaliation, being willing to die as a martyr than to kill, are manifestations of your salvation. They are central as the sacraments, and the clerics of our church should care just as much about these issues, about issues such as hatred, domestic violence, and conflict resolution, as they care about church attendance and who takes Eucharist every Sunday. They should care more about issues of peace than about whether the ethnic character of particular churches are preserved. St. Gregory Palamas said, quote, "The whole work of Christ's coming is to bring peace." Hence, the proclamation, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. I agree. The whole work of Christ's coming is to bring peace. Christ came down to tear down the dividing wall of enmity that exists between us and God and between us and one another. As Christians, it is our duty to continue this work. It is not optional. It is essential to us as it is to the essence of God, for peace is the essence of God. Thus, I think we are now in a position to understand the famous saying of St. Basil the Great, who said, quote, "There is nothing so characteristically Christian as being a peacemaker." Thank you very much.
Well done, Nicholas. Eirenology, sign me up. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Yeah. So in my response, I feel like I have to clarify that I'm a Protestant, but I'm a Protestant by default. I'm not protesting anything. I am a deep admirer of orthodoxy, and not just at a distance. You know, you mentioned Sergei Bulgakov. I think in the last few years, I've been able to read everything of his that's published in English, as far as I know. David Bentley Hart's a big influence. I don't know if you all claim him. John Behr is a personal friend. And so orthodoxy is it's not foreign to me, and I appreciate it deeply. But here's the troubling question I kind of want to raise is, why is it that Pope Francis has been able to be a voice of peace when it's been hard to find a similar kind of voice? And I'm sure you're going to give me answers of who has. I get that. In the Orthodox world. And I want to suggest that part of the problem is that Pope Francis no longer is actually tied to any kind of imperial aspirations. Yes, I mean, the Catholic Church has a long history in that, but those days are gone. Whereas there's still, you still have, Russia aspiring to be an empire. And when, in the Christian context, when that happens, empires look for a chaplaincy. And what do I mean by a chaplaincy? I mean, if you're going to be an empire, you have to go wage wars of aggression. And to do that, you have to recruit young men. That's not hard to do. That's actually a very easy thing to do. But what you need to do is try to placate mom and dad. That Johnny or Sergei is going off to war, but don't be afraid. This is God's on our side. and God is endorsing this, and God is blessing this. In the American history, the United States doesn't have an official state church. We just sort of have like de facto state churches. And for a long time, for a long time, it was essentially what we would call the mainline church. And that was the case until Vietnam. And the mainline church was uneasy about Vietnam and says, well, I'm not so sure that, God is blessing Johnny going off to Vietnam. And so that's when the evangelical church was able to step into the void and become the de facto state church in America. And so part of the problem is a church's ties with empire. And by empire, I mean, let me give you my definition. That's not just an empty pejorative. I mean, rich, powerful nations who believe they have a divine right to rule other nations and a manifest destiny to shape history according to their agenda. God loves nations. God's opposed to empire. And that's a theme that plays out literally throughout Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation. So that's my response. Man, I love what you're saying, and may Eirenology begin to take the field. And like I said, I'm the first to sign up for it. Amen.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Nicholas, so much. I really was almost really in ecstasy listening to you. I was in tears by the end. And I feel what you're attempting to do is to plant seeds within Orthodoxy and the world that may germinate, hopefully, in a generation or two. Clearly, a lot of Orthodoxy is, at this point, too bound up with national interest and empire.
Yeah,
But it's hopeful, what you were saying.
Thank
Hopeful.
you. And to piggyback off of that and answer Brian's question, I don't think the Orthodox Church has been doing a good job of this. I think there's a reason Orthodoxy has been at the forefront of this turn towards conflict in the past 2 years. Let me give some examples just to illustrate this point about mixing of empire and church. There's a saying I like from Tony Campolo that mixing church and state is like mixing manure and ice cream. It doesn't harm the manure, but it ruins your ice cream. So exactly. I mentioned the main church of the Russian armed forces in Russia. There's also the practice of blessing weapons of war with holy water. Mm-hmm. There's the canonization of Russian Admiral Fyodor Ushakov in 2001, who was famous in Russia for having never lost a single battle. Great qualification to be a saint. In 2005, he was declared patron saint of the nuclear armed strategic bombers. What a holy endeavor. There was a recent statement, or recent as of last year, by Patriarch Kirill that soldiers who die in battle will be cleansed. And the problem's not just in Russia. The whole Orthodox Church suffers from this. Here in America, I've had people tell me they converted to Orthodoxy because it's a manly Viking religion. There's a conspiracy theory in Greece on Mount Athos. When I visited, I had many people tell me about this, that one day there will be a global war that will destroy all the non-Orthodox Christians in the world and non-Christians, and that a glorious Byzantine Empire will arise from the ashes and rule for 1,000 years. My mentor, Jim Forrest, told me a story once relating to experience he had during a peace conference in Crete in Greece. He was taking part in a radio show with Metropolitan Eirenology. He said, quote, responding to a man who had called in to denounce Turks as barbarians who only understood violence. I, this is Jim speaking, summarized what Christ had to say on the subject of loving one's enemies and pointed out that Christ lived, died, and rose from the dead in a country suffering occupation, but he neither blessed nor took part in the zealots' armed struggle against the occupiers. That's all very well, the caller responded, but let me tell you about a real saint. He then proceeded to relate the story of a priest who in the 19th century played a valiant role in the war to drive Turks off the island. I think that captures very well the mindset in the Orthodox Church. Christ is all very well and good, but the real saints are those priests who killed the Turks, or the Ukrainians, or the Russians, or whoever your enemy of the day is. I think this is a total and utter betrayal of the Christian message, of this essence of peace that is the Godhead in the Christian confession. And I think the sooner the Orthodox Church can disentangle itself from these kind of ethnic and national aspirations, the better. But as I said, it is my hope that if it succeeds in doing that, the most effective way to create a peace system is through culture, through ritual, through values. And the church has a wide open lane here to lead the world into a more peaceful era.
That Jim Forrest was your mentor explains a lot, and that speaks well of you.
Nicholas, I appreciated what you were saying. I do not think that the Orthodox Church has a lock on this. I think the evangelical movement in America is broken in so many different ways. My own church, I'm a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, the AME Zion Church, what we call the Freedom Church, the Church of Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. I saw an advertisement that our bishops had put together. It was on Facebook. And in the midst of it, I saw flags and eagles and bombers, and I'm thinking to myself, where the hell did that come from? Right. So the people who have a bone or two to pick with religion and churches in general, you can hold up their kind of the militaristic nature of too much of what it is that we see going on in our institutions. And we see it goes back to the thing that I think Kierkegaard said, it's either the New Testament is correct or Christendom is, because the both of them cannot be correct because they're at odds with one another. And so I think that this kind of dialogue, where we hope to be able to hold one another to account around the very things, because we need rituals. We need the kinds of rituals that will speak differently than the ones that we already have. I'm thinking of the early church. I mean, they started out as essentially in the homes, largely of women, and there were meals. Right. And that was what was going on. And people sat down and had conversation. They were not it was not a religious service that started at 11 o'clock in the morning and ran till 12:30, raised an offering or two offerings, sang a few songs, delivered, distributed some wafers and some wine, and then everybody went home. It was much more family oriented than that. It was, and also they were under pressure, the kind of pressure that churches in our countries are not under. I mean, this so-called freedom to practice the religion the way you choose has allowed people to kind of go in any direction they want to go with almost no with almost no pushback. And in fact, and I was listening to Professor McGuckin this morning and remembering that he had said this once before, when the whole question around the COVID thing that was going on, and how he kept waiting for someone in the church to say something that would be some kind of pastoral message to the people. And he said he heard it from the Queen, but almost nothing from pulpits. And I'm distressed because I think that pastors are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of what might happen, and they're speaking out. This form of kind of professional suicide. Bishops are corrupt, and I'm speaking, categorically, and I know that there's always a danger in that. But the people that I think are the freest and the ones who have more control than they may realize are the laity, because there would be no churches if there were not lay folks sitting in those churches. So I'm hopeful with regard, because I remain hopeful. That's the kind of person that I am, but I'm not fooled. I'm not, blindly believing that people will just kind of, come to themselves and realize the mess that they've made out of the world. And I think the churches too often are more at fault. I think that if Jesus came back the way he showed up 2,000 years ago, we would hang him up on a cross just as quick as he showed up. So, the Orthodox have no corner on making a mess of religion.
I very much resonated with your ideas on what the society values. I never thought about that before. On parades, are we floating Snoopy and SpongeBob SquarePants? Are we, because I'm a musical theater guy, and I deal with the okay, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is often, an infomercial for Broadway, but there be it, and it's what the children watch. Um, and that we don't have uh, have I ever seen a military parade? I don't think I ever have, actually. I've never seen, okay, if they're there, I don't go. I've seen reenactments, but those don't have too many people. But it goes also in thinking of my own things, which is who's the hero in the society? Like the Czech Republic has Václav Havel as the hero in the society. He made a poet, the hero in your society. And that's to some degree in certain of the cultures, but it's also, I think, what is that word, Nick, for when people preach a theology that says one's national church is better than the other nations? You would get the Risky Mir stuff.
Ethnophiletism.
What is it?
Ethnophiletism.
Ethnophiletism. Yes. So it's like our culture is the best culture. Our culture is better than yours. We have the best music, the best poetry, the best everything. So last week we were selecting candidates for interviews for residency, and the name of the school in Egypt was called the October 6th School. I'm like, October 6th? And the Egyptian chief resident said, oh yeah, in my country, that's a very big holiday. It's a big holiday, October 6th. What happened on October 6th? Like Egyptian Independence Day? No, that's the day we kicked those Israelis out of Sinai. The big holiday. We name our schools after it. So what's a holiday? And that how, as I said in my talk, is that the subject of my master's thesis was the theological and political writings of ISIS and Al Qaeda, and they basically said the theologian, the true fuqaha, studier of religious law, is the guy with the gun. And those other people who preach peace, they're scholars for dollars. They're quote, quote, effeminate court scholars. And so when you said, make it that we are more proud to die, to be a martyr, than being proud of killing. So I think that what you talked about was highly effective, had a high effect. And I have been disappointed to not have well, to be at a synod of Orthodox clergy earlier this year. The first thing that was talked about was Ukraine, but it was very gingerly. Like we feel we want peace. We've sent them some money. We feel bad for them. We must pray for those who are in error. But it didn't, it was not strong terms. It's kind of like if I was being mugged or beaten, that somebody comes by and the policeman comes by and said, I would really appreciate it if you'd stop beating him. It didn't have any teeth. So thank you very much. But I'll be thinking about that one. What do we value in a parade? What's the value?
America doesn't have military parades. We have air shows. Military parades are 19th century. We have the air shows that attract huge crowds and the fighter jets and the bombers. And that's what we
Right.
have.
Right. The Blue Angels.
Right.
That's, I want to thank the gentleman for his presentation. And
You have to speak up, Andrew. We can barely hear you.
I want to thank the gentleman for his presentation concerning our wantonness in the practice of peace. You know, Apostle Paul uses a great deal in his epistle, Kariske Eirene, grace and peace. And at some point, this struggle to, again, incarnate grace and peace into our own person and into community. I think a great deal of what you were talking about, DeForest, was the church lived in community. It struggled to practice koinonia, fellowship, and that when we come together in the liturgy, in the Eucharist, the breaking of bread, we come together to embody peace that has been given to us through justification and sanctification, that we begin to understand not only as persons, but as community, we rid ourselves of the violence of indifference. And the struggle to embrace this season again is that peace embodied has come to us. And we have to proclaim and demonstrate what peace is in community. So I'm very grateful for his presentation to remind us, you know, we're not there. We have to struggle. We have to press.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well said. And to respond to your point, Conrad, I remember a week before the invasion of Ukraine, I was having dinner with a Russian fellow who told me all of the American warnings about the invasion were lies. It wasn't going to happen. Reports weren't credible. And I did find the reports credible. And I predicted, I said that I thought that the invasion was going to happen February 24th. Now, why did I think that? How did I guess the date correctly? You know, I didn't have any secret intelligence. Even, you know, the dates that the U.S. had announced weren't the real dates. It was the 24th. Why? Because February 23rd is Defender of the Fatherland Day in Russia. It's a national holiday celebrating the armed forces. And what did Patriarch Kirill do the evening of February 23rd before the invasion? He was out there with his holy water blessing the troops, giving a great speech about how wonderful the troops have been. So these symbols are very powerful, especially in religious places, especially for Orthodox Christians. Symbols are very powerful. I think it's no coincidence the invasion happened when it did. And that is why I think it is so essential for Orthodox Christians to change the symbolology here, to say God is not a God of blessing troops and invasions. It's not the God of military conquests, but is a God of peace. And if that is the banner that you hold up, it gets a lot harder, at least to distort Christianity for these violent ends.
Yeah, I just wanted to say how much I appreciated so much of what was said today. It's so good to hear so many voices within the Orthodox realm talking about the gospel of nonviolent love of friend and enemy. But I think what we didn't do as much, and I would hope that perhaps in another gathering we could help. How do we communicate, those of us who are on the front lines in parish ministry, how do we communicate this to our parishioners? It is extremely hard to put it in a way that people can hear, because there's so much working against what we're trying to communicate, including so little support within the larger church. So perhaps at some point we could convene a meeting about how do we go about doing this.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, how are we so amazingly on time? All right. Well, proved it was a very good subject.